The afternoon sky had opened like a wound, spilling heavy sheets of rain over the little town. Water drummed against the rooftops, cascaded through the clogged gutters, and flooded the cobblestones with tiny rivers racing toward the drains. Most people hurried home under umbrellas or waited beneath canopies, unwilling to brave the storm. But Clare Morgan had no such luxury. Her umbrella had snapped in two earlier that morning, and though her thin jacket clung to her shoulders, the rain pierced straight through. She adjusted the threadbare tote bag clutched close to her chest, guarding the bread and 2 cans of soup she had bought with the last of her week's wages. Rent was looming, her shoes had holes in the sides, and electricity bills stacked like silent threats in the kitchen drawer of her tiny basement apartment. Yet she pressed forward, head bowed against the downpour. She did not notice the sleek black car idling near the curb until its door opened abruptly. A man stumbled out, tall and broad-shouldered, his silver tie plastered against a white dress shirt already soaked through. He swore under his breath, shielding his head with one large hand as he struggled with a leather briefcase. Clare stopped a few steps away. His suit jacket clung awkwardly, clearly imported and expensive, though the rain was ruining it by the second. Nothing about him matched this street, these cracked cobblestones, or her cheap groceries. He looked like he had walked straight out of a magazine shoot and landed gracelessly into the wettest day of the year. Their eyes met. His gaze was sharp, startlingly blue, and locked on her as though she might somehow hold the answer to escaping the storm. His lips curved into a half smile, both sheepish and oddly vulnerable for someone so outwardly commanding. "Excuse me," he said over the roar of rain. "Do you know anywhere nearby, somewhere dry?" Clare blinked. Why was he asking her? She was nobody dripping on the sidewalk. Yet something in his tone was genuine, stripped of entitlement. Against her better judgment, because speaking to strangers, let alone ones in designer shoes, was never wise, she gestured to the battered cafe across the street. The neon sign flickered, but at least the door was open. "Come on," she said, raising her voice above the storm. "Hurry before you drown out here." He followed without hesitation, boots splashing in puddles as they darted across. Clare pushed the cafe door open, a wave of warmth and roasted coffee greeting them. They shook like wet dogs once inside, dripping steadily onto the tiled floor. The elderly owner glanced up with mild annoyance at their soggy state, but Clare guided the stranger toward a booth by the window, ignoring the stares of a couple regulars. He set down his ruined briefcase and ran both hands through his rain-darkened hair, then exhaled heavily as though grateful for even this modest escape. "I owe you," he said sincerely. His voice had the steady cadence of someone accustomed to making decisions, giving orders, yet carrying now a gentle lilt of gratitude. She shrugged, hugging her tote bag against the seat. "It's just coffee and shelter. You don't owe me anything." The waitress, a tired woman with red lipstick smudged at the edges, shuffled over to take their order. He pulled a wallet from his soaked slacks, clearly thick with bills, but hesitated. Clare quickly ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, black coffee. He ordered the same and slid 2 20s across the table. The waitress's eyes widened, and she left immediately, far more cheerful than before. For a long moment they sat in silence. Raindrops streamed down the glass beside them, blurring the outside world into streaks of gray. Clare studied him discreetly. His jaw was strong, defined. His watch, though water-spotted, still gleamed unmistakably expensive. But his shoulders sagged in a way she recognized all too well, the weight of exhaustion, of battles carried alone. "You're not from around here," she finally said. His lips quirked. "That obvious? You look like you're supposed to step out of a limousine with bodyguards, not tumble out of a car half drowned into Maple Street." He chuckled softly, a low warm sound somehow at odds with the storm outside. "Fair point. Business brought me here. Wrong turn, broken wipers, and then my driver had a flat 2 blocks back. I thought I'd wait in the car, but..." He gestured at his soaked sleeves. Clearly the sky had other plans. Clare smiled faintly despite herself. Something about his self-deprecation felt disarming. He wasn't throwing his wealth around or pretending the storm was beneath him. He just looked like a man temporarily defeated by nature. The coffees arrived. Steam curled upward, mingling with the scent of roasted beans. He cradled the mug between his broad hands and exhaled, letting the warmth seep into his bones. "And what about you?" he asked, tilting his head thoughtfully. "What brings you out in this mess? Surely any sane person would be home by now, tucked under a blanket." Her cheeks heated slightly. There was no glamorous excuse, no business meeting, no fine restaurant waiting. Just groceries and unpaid bills. "I work mornings at the bakery across town. Finished late, still had errands. Life doesn't wait for rain to stop," she said simply. He studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering behind his expression. Respect perhaps. Curiosity too. "Life doesn't wait," he repeated softly, almost as if trying the words for himself. They sat together longer than strangers normally would, watching the storm hurl waves against the glass. Claire tried not to be too aware of the way others in the cafe stole glances. The drenched beauty pairing of a mysterious rich man and a poor girl in faded sneakers. When the storm finally softened to drizzle, he rose, adjusting his jacket, briefcase in hand. "Thank you," he said again. "For shelter. For company." "You're welcome," she replied, trying to keep it casual, though a strange knot twisted behind her ribs. He paused at the door. For a second it seemed he might ask her name. Might extend this moment just a little longer. But instead, he offered a small smile, a glimmer of something unspoken in his blue eyes, and stepped back into the misting rain. And just like that he was gone. Claire sat for long moments, staring at the empty booth across from her. She told herself it meant nothing. Just a stranger. Just a coincidence. Yet some part of her, the part that dreamed in secret when bills weren't crushing and nights weren't endless, whispered, "Some meetings are not accidents." She shook her head, gathered her tote, and left the cafe. By the time she keyed into her dim basement apartment, her hair still damp and her jacket heavy with water, the moment already felt like an illusion. He belonged to another world. She belonged here, scraping by. Their paths had collided only briefly, cracked open by rain, before snapping shut again. Still, when she lay awake that night listening to the patter of rain against her window, she couldn't help replaying the look in his eyes as he'd thanked her, the way he had said her words back as though they mattered. She told herself to forget. She didn't. For years she didn't. 3 years passed, slipping through Claire's fingers like sand. Seasons changed, storms came and went, and Maple Street still carried the smell of baked bread in the mornings. Claire kept her tiny apartment, worked long shifts at the bakery, and on weekends picked up odd jobs, cleaning houses, tutoring neighborhood kids, even walking dogs, to fill the constant gaps left by bills. She learned to live with routine but not without dreams. Late at night, when exhaustion emptied into silence, she sometimes thought of that day in the rain. Not with childish longing, but with an ache that felt like unfinished chapters. Who had he been? Where had he gone? Why had his gratitude felt so piercingly personal, as if he'd seen beyond her dripping hair and worn shoes to something she couldn't define? She almost convinced herself she had imagined the depth in his eyes, that she had read too much into a moment built by circumstance. And yet, whenever rain drummed on her little window, her heart always paused. Still, life had no patience for fantasies. Her mother's health declined steadily, leaving Claire juggling hospital visits. Her father had been gone for years, leaving debts instead of support. Claire shouldered each weight bitterly but quietly, telling herself strength was found in perseverance. One evening, after months of saving scrupulously, Claire brought home a second-hand laptop. She wanted more than routine. She wanted to study, to sharpen the sparks of ambition she'd always buried under necessity. At 24, with the bakery as her anchor, she buried herself in online courses, event planning, communications, and business basics. The glowing screen became her secret escape, her ember of progress in a world that had asked her only to survive. It was on a cloud-soft spring morning that her life shattered open again. The bakery bell jingled cheerfully as customers streamed in for their daily bread. Claire stood behind the counter, apron smudged with flour, hair tied hastily back, hands warm from kneading dough. She was scrawling prices on a chalkboard when the door opened again, and silence swept across the room like a held breath. He stepped in. At first she didn't place him. His presence was too striking, too commanding compared to the rain-soaked stranger who had stumbled into her life years earlier. But then their eyes met, the same storm-blue eyes that had once locked on hers in desperation and gratitude, and recognition slammed into her like thunder. "Andrew." Only now he wasn't simply a man caught in a storm. He was transformed. His suit alone spoke volumes, tailored perfection in midnight blue, with cufflinks that glittered under the modest bakery lights. An assistant followed discreetly behind him, phone in hand, and outside through the small window, Claire saw the sleek black limousine idling at the curb. The bakery patrons whispered among themselves, clearly recognizing his aura of wealth and power. He could have belonged on the cover of a finance magazine, any one of those titans who shaped nations with boardroom deals. Yet instead he stood there, gaze pinned to Claire as though no one else in the room existed. "It's you," he said softly, voice carrying over the murmurs. Her chalk dropped, clattering to the counter. For a moment neither moved. Claire's breath lodged painfully in her chest. He stepped closer, ignoring the stares, the cell phones discreetly trying to capture photos. His expression was something between disbelief and relief, as though he had carried her memory like a phantom and now found her real again. "I never forgot," he said. Her voice wavered. "You shouldn't be here." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were more serious than she remembered. "And yet here I am." The assistant cleared his throat politely, but Andrew raised a quiet hand, dismissal without words. Their conversation, fragile and impossible, stretched like invisible wire between them. He bought nothing, didn't glance at the shelves or the bread trays. Instead, he extended a polished business card across the counter. The card was understated, embossed only with his name in silver foil, Andrew Weston. Beneath it, one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. "Dinner?" he asked, the single word carrying weight. "So I can finally thank you properly." Her hand trembled as she accepted the card, brushing his fingers. Old electricity shot through her veins. But fear welled just as strongly, pressing her words tight. I don't belong in your world." His eyes held hers without a flicker. "Then we'll meet in yours." And just as suddenly as the first time he was gone, the limousine sweeping away as whispers trailed behind him. Claire stood rooted to the counter, his card a silver-edged flame searing her palm. The rest of the day blurred, customers, orders, trays of bread moving by rote. Inside she was chaos. He had returned not as a stranger stranded by rain but as a man who commanded skyscrapers. Yet his voice, his eyes, still spoke to her as though the rain had never stopped falling. That night, in her cramped apartment, she stared at the card under the low lamplight. Andrew Weston. His name was etched into the world of billionaires, but she had only known him as the drenched man who had smiled sheepishly across a cafe booth. A dozen reasons screamed no. He was untouchable, leagues beyond her. She was nothing but a girl with flour under her fingernails. What could come of meeting again, except heartbreak magnified by wealth's cruel glare? But her heart whispered louder. He had remembered her across years and empires. He had sought her out, not merely stumbled back by coincidence. The odds were impossible and undeniable. The next evening, she stood hesitantly outside a candlelit restaurant Andrew had suggested. The maitre d' opened the heavy glass doors. Inside, chandeliers sparkled over linen-draped tables. Her thrift store dress trembled under her nerves and she nearly turned away. But then she saw him waiting already at a corner table, suit jacket off, smile warmer than chandeliers. Every instinct screamed to leave a world not hers. But his gaze held her steady. And she walked in. Little did she know that with that step, everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and destiny was about to unravel into something far greater than she could imagine. The restaurant glowed warmly, every polished surface reflecting candlelight like captured stars. Waiters glided noiselessly between tables draped with crisp linens, their trays carrying crystal glasses and delicate plates of food too exquisite to describe in ordinary terms. It was the kind of place people saved for anniversaries or once-in-a-lifetime celebrations. For Claire, just stepping across the threshold felt like trespassing into a dream. Her fingers fidgeted nervously with the strap of her plain handbag, the thrift store dress clinging uncomfortably to her every self-conscious thought. She felt eyes on her as she entered, the well-heeled regulars noting instantly that she didn't belong. The air itself seemed to remind her, heavy with expensive perfume and understated arrogance. Then she saw him. Andrew had already risen from his seat at the corner table. His suit jacket hung neatly on the chair behind him, leaving him in a pressed white shirt unbuttoned just enough at the collar to soften his formality. He wasn't staring at his phone, wasn't reading the wine list. He was looking only at her, and when she caught his gaze, something in her chest steadied. "Claire," he said, his voice a warm, grounding balm. He said her name like he'd practiced it, like it mattered. She approached tentatively, the room fading around his focus. He pulled her chair out as though it were a throne and she some foreign queen, not a worn-out baker's assistant. "You came," he said as she sat. She smiled faintly, lowering her gaze to the shining cutlery. "I almost didn't. You should know, there's no world in which I'd have let you walk away again." The words startled her, not arrogance but conviction, as if fate itself had appointed him guardian of this moment. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring wine into their glasses. Claire stared down at the ruby liquid, unsure whether she even liked wine, but unwilling to admit it in a place like this. Andrew raised his glass slightly. "To rainstorms," he toasted, a glint of memory lighting his eyes. "Without them, I might never have met you." She laughed softly, surprised by how natural it sounded even to her own ears. They clinked glasses and she forced herself to sip. Smooth, expensive, nothing like the bitter jug wine she'd occasionally shared at cheap bars. For a minute, silence stretched, filled only by the murmur of conversations around them. Claire finally broke it, her voice cautious. "Why me? Out of everyone in your world, why find me again after all this time?" Andrew leaned back in his seat, thoughtful, as though searching for the exact words. "Because most people in my life want something from me, money, status, influence. That day in the rain you didn't. You were soaked, shivering, living your own battles. And yet you offered me shelter. Not for what I could give you, but for what I simply was, another human being drowning under the same storm. That kind of truth, it doesn't leave you." She swallowed hard, fiddling with her napkin. "That's very romantic. But I don't think you understand. I can't compete with your world. I barely scrape by. I still worry about rent. You walk in here and people bow in your direction. If we try to mix worlds, I'll be swallowed whole." Andrew's eyes locked firmly on hers. "So don't compete with it. Don't measure yourself against their rules, Claire. I'm not asking for someone to navigate my world, I'm asking for someone to be real with me in it. And that's you." Her chest tightened painfully at his sincerity. She wanted to believe him. But doubt clung stubbornly. Their food arrived like pieces of art, dishes Claire couldn't pronounce, intricately plated. She hesitated, fork hovering uncertainly over unfamiliar sauces. Andrew noticed her struggle immediately. Without mockery, he slid his plate closer. "Try this," he encouraged, using his fork to cut a small piece and offering it across the table as though sharing secrets. His eyes twinkled, boyish suddenly, stripping power from the moment's intimidation. She leaned forward cautiously, accepting the bite. Against her will, her lips curved upward. "That's actually amazing." His smile spread widely, as if her approval mattered more than the signature of the world-famous chef in the back. "See? Not all mysteries are meant to scare you." Dinner progressed, conversation softening into laughter and quiet confessions. He told her stories about traveling for work, satirical portraits of pompous businessmen, boardroom disasters, amusing cultural mishaps. She admitted how she'd started taking online courses, trying to carve a future bigger than four walls of a bakery. His expression, instead of dismissiveness, glowed with pride. "You already have more courage than most CEOs I've met," he told her. "You invest in yourself when every circumstance tells you not to. That's brilliance." The words clung to her like armor, warming the parts of her long dulled by exhaustion. When dessert came, Andrew set his fork down, his expression shifting to seriousness. "Claire, there's something you should understand. Re-entering your life wasn't to play savior, or drop extravagance on your world. I came back because seeing you again reminded me of who I want to be when the money fades, when the titles crumble. The rain took away my power that day and all I had left was myself. You saw that and still sat with me." She could only stare, her throat tight. "I'm not asking you for an answer tonight," he added gently. "I just want the chance to prove that this isn't a fragile fantasy. That what started as serendipity could actually lead somewhere real." Claire found herself whispering, "Why me?" again, but softer this time, not disbelief but yearning. His answer came without hesitation. "Because you make me feel like Andrew, not Weston Industries. Not a billionaire." "Andrew." The rawness in his voice struck deeper than any extravagance. And though fear still gnawed at her, she couldn't deny the truth glittering between them, something worth risking everything for. They lingered until the restaurant emptied, until staff pushed brooms quietly around tables. As he escorted her outside into the cool night, the city lights stretching infinite around them, he offered his arm with old-fashioned charm. She hesitated, then slipped her hand through. The limousine door stood open, luxury humming within. She faltered, the divide between her alleyway life and his seamless world yawning wide. He noticed her hesitation immediately. With a quiet smile, he dismissed the driver and pressed a set of keys into her palm. Across the street, parked humbly at the curb, was a car barely newer than hers. A temporary rental, ordinary among the city glitter. "Shall we walk?" he asked instead. "Sometimes streetlights and sidewalks are better company than chauffeurs." Her laugh rang in the evening air. And they did walk, like two people unmoored from expectation, rediscovering one another across the distance years had set between them. For the first time since the storm years ago, Claire felt the whisper again, that some meetings were not accidents. This one certainly wasn't. The following week unfolded like pages from a book Claire never believed she'd read, much less live inside. Andrew was careful, deliberately so. No overnight explosions of wealth, no overwhelming symbols that might startle her further. Instead, his gestures were human. He texted her good mornings instead of sending diamonds. He brought soup the day she mentioned having a cold. He insisted on walking her home after dinner, defying the barrier between his chauffeured limousine and her cracked sidewalk steps. But the world around them was not so gentle. Small sparks of rumor had already started filtering into society columns. Andrew Weston, elusive financial giant, spotted dining with mystery woman. Anonymous shots had surfaced online, grainy photos of Claire and Andrew leaving the restaurant, his posture protective, her hand slipped nervously through his arm. The comments beneath were merciless. Who is she? Not his type. Gold digger moves fast. Claire tried to shield herself from them, but words have a way of finding cracks. People don't matter, Andrew said firmly when she showed him an article one night. They were on her couch, her apartment's bare walls trembling under the contrast of his presence. They never stopped talking. The only thing that matters is us. But Claire wasn't sure. She knew how fragile self-worth could become under constant scrutiny. And Andrew's world wasn't filled with cafés and bakeries, it was filled with chandeliers, power dinners, high-end galas, the kind of spotlight that wouldn't dim just because he willed it to. That reality came crashing faster than she expected. It began with an invitation, a charity gala downtown benefiting children's hospitals. Andrew had donated heavily, and the board insisted he attend. "It's not optional," he explained with a sheepish grimace. Then, more carefully, "Come with me?" Her heart skipped. "Me? In that ballroom with your people?" "They're not my people," he corrected gently. "But yes, with me. Because I don't want to stand under chandeliers alone anymore." She agreed, though anxiety churned every time she thought of polished gowns and camera flashes aimed at her. The night of the gala, she hesitated before her tiny cracked bathroom mirror. Her thrifted dress had seemed elegant in the resale shop, but under her glowing bulb it looked ordinary compared to the image she conjured of Andrew's world. She nearly unzipped it, nearly collapsed in defeat. And then a knock sounded. She opened her door to find Andrew himself standing in the hallway, tuxedo pressing elegance into the peeling paint. But in his hands was a dress bag. "I had a feeling you'd overthink," he teased softly. She shook her head quickly. "Andrew, I can't accept." "You can," he said firmly. "And it's not about money. It's about walking in as equals. Let me." Inside the bag was a gown shimmering midnight blue, simple but astonishing, paired with modest jewelry far humbler than the wealth he could have flung at her. Claire swallowed tears as she changed, emerging to find Andrew watching her like someone who had glimpsed starlight. At the gala itself, chandeliers beamed across marble floors. Journalists barked questions from behind velvet ropes. Claire's heart pounded, but Andrew kept her hand steady in his voice calm as though directing the storm itself. For several minutes, whispers ricocheted. Who was she? Where did she come from? Reporters speculated, women in diamonds stared coldly, business rivals sneered. But Andrew never let go of her, introducing her to executives, donors, friends, not as guest or companion, but simply, "This is Clare." The simplicity held more meaning than any jewel could. Yet she could sense the storm brewing. The sideways glances. The politely veiled questions. The unmistakable disapproval radiating from certain corners. And then, near the end of the night, it condensed into a single pointed interaction. Andrew, a gray-haired man, boomed, stepping forward with champagne in hand. His wife clung to his arm, her diamonds catching light. Always too busy conquering markets to return calls, but apparently not too busy for company. His eyes skimmed Clare, disapproval barely veiled. She opened her mouth to stammer something polite, but Andrew's hand tightened. "Richard," he said evenly. "Meet Clare. The remarkable woman I've told you about." The older man's eyebrow arched, his wife's lips pursed thin. And with saccharine smiles they drifted away, leaving Clare burning shame beneath her skin. "See," she hissed softly once they were alone again. "They judge me before I can speak." "Then don't waste breath on people unworthy of your voice," Andrew answered firmly, though regret lingered in his eyes. Still, the seed was planted. That night, back in her apartment, while Andrew poured wine and pressed kisses to her shoulder, she wondered how long she could last in a world tilting knives at her from every gilded corner. The answer came sooner than she imagined: family. It was a simple brunch Andrew agreed to, hosted at his sister's estate. "She's traditional," he warned as they drove, his jaw tense. "But she'll warm to you. She has to." Clare, trying to believe, sat straighter as the mansion loomed. His sister greeted them with a smile as polished as the cutlery, introducing Clare to a long mahogany table of cousins, nephews, friends of the family. Every remark was too pointed. "Where are you from, dear? And what does your family do?" "How quaint, working at a bakery." Clare answered as gracefully as nerves allowed, but under the table her hands trembled in her lap. When Andrew excused himself to take a business call, his sister leaned subtly across the linen. "You seem sweet," she murmured. "But Andrew's world, it devours people who aren't born for it. Don't let yourself be a distraction. He has responsibilities." The words landed like knives. Clare couldn't prevent the tremor in her voice. "I'm not trying to." "I'm sure you're not," his sister cut smoothly, reclining back with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. By the time Andrew returned, the air had returned to polite chatter, but Clare felt flayed. On the drive home she said nothing, staring out at the blur of passing city lights. Andrew glanced over, concern flickering. "They were difficult, I know. I warned you." "They weren't difficult," she whispered. "They were clear." "Clear about what?" "That I don't belong." Andrew pulled the car over abruptly, turning to face her. His tone sharpened with urgency. "Clare, listen to me. Everything they said, everything society writes, every whispered speculation, it's noise. You belong with me. That's all that matters." Her heart wanted desperately to believe, but fear gnawed. She nodded mutely, not for his reassurance but to quiet the storm building inside her. That night, back in her small apartment, she lay awake. The taste of wine, chandeliers, and family judgment tangled in her memory. Lightning flickered behind her shuttered window. And as rain began to fall again, the same rain that once brought him into her life, Clare wondered if some storms were meant not to unite, but to tear apart. The storm wasn't only in Clare's heart, it became external, relentless, and invasive. By the second week after the gala, gossip columns had upgraded from whispers to full-blown editorials. Headlines screamed, "Andrew Weston's mystery woman, a nobody or the next billionaire bride?" From bread oven to ballroom, the strange rise of Clare Morgan. Photographers camped near the bakery, flashing cameras the instant Clare stepped outside. Customers whispered, either with envy or derision. Some came just to gawk, craning necks for proof of scandal. Tip jars filled with notes sliding judgment under folded bills. "Gold digger, trap him while you can." Clare buried her head low, apron tied tight, pretending to focus on dough. But humiliation lodged deep, cloying rhythm of her days with bitterness. When Andrew showed up that evening with his easy smile and open arms, she nearly crumpled into them, exhaustion leaking through every corner of her body. "I can't handle this spotlight," she whispered into his chest. "Then don't," he said firmly. "Let me handle it." That night, he ordered his legal team. Cease and desist notices to tabloids, phone calls to PR offices, silences demanded from channels who fed on gossip. But money could stifle headlines only halfway. Voyeurism thrives in shadow where wealth can't put out fires. One morning Claire arrived at the bakery to find Billionaire's pet project, scrawled in chalk across the wall. She stared at it, stomach hollowing, until the owner sheepishly scrubbed it away with water. Customers inside stared, murmuring. She swallowed shame, pretending again as though routine would drown the noise. But shame doesn't drown, it rots, spreading unseen. Days later, Andrew insisted she stay at his penthouse for a weekend. At least you can breathe without cameras under your windows, he told her, brushing a strand of hair from her damp face. The penthouse was an entirely different universe. Glass walls stretched across the skyline, every light of the city shimmering beneath them. Furnishings gleamed, minimal and expensive enough to fund an entire street's rent for a year. Claire's heart twisted, beauty and extravagance pressed against her like both temptation and rejection. "This isn't my world," she whispered that first night, padding barefoot across marble floors. Andrew followed her silently, catching her hand. "It's not mine either, not really. You think suites and skyscrapers make me who I am? They don't. I've never felt more myself than at that rainy cafe booth with you." The words lit something fragile in her chest. But still she hesitated. The next test came faster than either expected. Andrew's brother, Michael, a polished executive with ambition stamped into every line of his jaw, showed up at the penthouse uninvited. Claire froze at the sight of him stepping out of the private elevator, his tailored coat dusted by winter wind. "Andrew," he said with clipped tone, "we need to talk. Alone." Andrew stayed firm. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her." A pause flickered in Michael's eyes, a calculation, and then sharpened disapproval. "Fine. Everyone in the company is watching you. This distraction may feel harmless, but clients talk, partners whisper. Marrying beneath you will cost us influence. Investors hate uncertainty. Clare Morgan is uncertainty." Claire flushed deep red, nails biting into her palms. Andrew's voice pierced steel. "Clare Morgan is human. That's who I'm with. If investors want perpetual masquerades, maybe they should find leaders who wear masks better than me." Michael sneered softly, ignoring her presence now entirely. "You'll regret this. The board won't forgive chaos." Andrew's hand slid protectively over Claire's knuckles. "Let them try. My life's not theirs to dictate." When Michael was gone, silence pressed thick against the glass walls. Claire turned to Andrew, throat tight. "They'll never accept me," she said quietly. "Then it's not acceptance we seek, it's courage," he countered. "I don't want to pull you down," she admitted. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've built." But Andrew's eyes only softened further, radiant with conviction. Claire listened carefully. "Everything I've built was dust until I found what mattered. If losing dust means keeping you, then I'll set it ablaze myself." His passion terrified her, terrified and humbled, because she wasn't sure she was strong enough to bear the storms tied to his world. But his determination wove into her marrow. For a moment she clung to him, both frightened and fierce. The days that followed swung like pendulum. Blissful nights in his arms, disastrous mornings filled with newspaper venom. Each moment doubled down on contrast. The simplicity of laughter with him over shared omelets, the cruelty of society pages dragging her name through mud by noon. Her mother's declining health became another blow. Journalists hounded the hospital parking lot after catching whispers of her visits. One even shoved a camera in her mother's direction until Andrew batted it away with fury, threatening lawsuits. Claire sobbed in their car afterward, voice breaking. "They won't leave us even at my mother's deathbed." "They won't," Andrew admitted grimly. "Unless we tell them to." Loudly. She lifted tear-blurred eyes. "How?" And there, under the hum of the quiet car, wheels of something bigger turned in Andrew's gaze. "I have an idea," he murmured. The idea wasn't whispered romance, it was fire. He would make their love undeniable. Not as rumor, not as scandal, but as fact carved into marble. It both thrilled and terrified her. For she knew intuitively that stepping across that threshold meant there would be no return. It began with whispers in boardrooms and trickled into polished press releases, but Andrew's plan became thunder at the annual Weston Foundation Gala. It wasn't supposed to be about him at all. It was $1 million event funding schools, glittering with gold decor and brimming with journalists hungry for photographs. But Andrew had engineered it quietly, deliberately, to put the entire truth under chandeliers where no one could look away. Clare almost refused to come. Her throat had already blistered from gossip, her name dragged in tabloids like mud on silk carpets. She told Andrew more than once, "I can't do this, I don't belong there." But he refused measured words. He cupped her hands in his relentless grip, eyes burning with focus. "You belong beside me. And I don't care whose illusions shatter tonight, I care only that you stop hiding in the shadows of my life." The words left her trembling. For the first time, his world's blinding lights would point at her openly. No returns, no retreat. So she stood now in a navy gown that Andrew swore made her look like night itself, sapphire earrings glinting against her nervous breath. Photographers flared as soon as they stepped into the ballroom. "Andrew, who's on your arm? Is this the mystery woman we've seen?" But Andrew didn't move as he normally would. He didn't deflect or stride past with icy silence. He paused, smiled, drew Clare closer so the world could not pretend. "This is Clare," he said to the first microphone shoved into his path. Clear, deliberate. "The woman I love." Cameras snapped like thunderclaps, a storm raining light. Clare froze, every nerve exposed to the violent curiosity of the press. But Andrew's arm tightened at the small of her back. That warmth was her shield. Inside, whispers multiplied tenfold. She caught eyes widening, champagne glasses halted mid-sip. She heard fragments floating. "He can't be serious. She's ordinary. How dangerous." Andrew ignored it all. He paraded her through conversations like royalty, introducing her to dignitaries, CEOs, actresses, not as novelty but necessity. Each handshake came with 4 words, "And this is Clare." Still, not all smiles were genuine. His sister cornered Clare near the refreshment table during a brief separation. Her lipstick was as red as a warning flame, her tone carefully measured. "You realize what you've done?" she murmured. That declaration might mean the downfall of his career. Clare's stomach dropped, but she swallowed against weakness. "I didn't ask him to." "No. But you didn't stop him either." Her sister-in-law's gaze flicked like a knife. "He's putting his legacy on the line for you. Ask yourself if you're worth the ruins." Clare couldn't even defend herself. Words lodged in her chest, broken glass on every angle. But when Andrew returned, radiating calm, she let him lead her to the stage. When the charity bids concluded, lights shifted and applause fell. Andrew stepped to the microphone, the spotlight carving diamonds in his hair. Clare lingered invisibly at the edge, heart a mess. "Tonight," Andrew began, voice smooth but sharpened by steel, "we celebrate generosity. But tonight is also personal. Many of you know me as a number on a list, a photo in an article, a profit margin scribbled into headlines. Some of you think you know every part of me. You don't. For years, I've guarded the only thing that matters as though it were secret when it should have been truth." Murmurs rippled, eyes snapping upward. Clare's chest quaked. He stretched a hand toward her. "Clare, join me." Every instinct screamed no. To hide. To flee. But his gaze was unwavering. Against gravity, her legs carried her up. Spotlight bathed them both under 1,000 eyes glittering with disbelief and greed. "This," Andrew continued, his hand grasping hers, lifting it in declaration, "is the woman who saved me once on a rain-soaked street when no one else would have cared. She gave me shelter in a storm without asking who I was, what I was worth. Long before any of you pretended at respect, she saw me as simply Andrew. For that, I will spend every breath ensuring she is never diminished again." Gasps echoed. Flashes rained like fireworks. Clare swallowed hard, pulse thunderous. "This is not a scandal," Andrew said flatly into the microphone. "This is my life. This is my love. And unlike profit margins, love does not apologize." Applause erupted, not from everyone, not from most of the elite circle's glaring daggers, but from the ordinary audience scattered across the gala. Caterers clapped, journalists clapped, younger entrepreneurs clapped. A ripple of humanity spread through the sterile ballroom. For the first time in the chaos, Clare saw acceptance, raw and unrefined. When they left the stage, her knees trembled. Andrew whispered close to her ear, "Now the world knows. They can't unsee us. No more shadows." For one glittering second, pride bloomed, a victory not measured in jewels or headlines, but in truth finally spoken. But outside, after the gala concluded, flames of backlash already licked the night. Society pages framed her as villain, gold digger identified, bread shop girl ensnaring Weston fortune. Rival families whispered about corporate weaknesses, associates doubted Andrew's judgment. His brother's voice thundered in urgent calls, "You've jeopardized everything." Clare sat in his penthouse days later, watching her face appear on magazine covers, painted with salacious captions. Her hands shook, breath shallow. "I can't," she whispered. "Andrew, I can't take this hurricane. It's eating me alive." Andrew knelt before her, every skyscraper in view behind him. "Then let it eat me instead. But don't you dare walk away. Because the storm without you is death compared to any hurricane with you." Tears streaked down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, needed to. But she knew storms carried more than rain. They tore families apart, twisted loyalties, toppled towers. And love, no matter how fierce, had yet to prove if it was enough to hold against the tempest gathering around them. The hurricane Andrew had promised to shoulder spilled into every corner of Clare's life. Within days of the gala, tabloids published sprawling spreads, crafting lurid backstories Clare had never lived. Old photographs stolen from half-forgotten school albums were plastered online. Blurry images of her working shifts at diners, walking home with cheap groceries, leaving her run-down apartment. Each caption spat with contempt, "Weston Cinderella, or con artist?" The bakery grew unbearable. Customers arrived not for bread but for a glimpse at the infamous gold digger. Some whispered audibly as she wrapped their pastries, others asked invasive questions like rough hands probing for weakness. One evening, she locked herself in the tiny staff restroom, tears slipping silently while the sink faucet ran to mask her sobs. When she emerged, Andrew was waiting by the counter, his tuxedo a startling contrast to the flour-dusted shelves. He had dismissed his assistant at the door and stood alone, eyes sharp with anger. "Clare, this ends tonight." "What do you mean?" His voice brooked no argument. "You can't live under siege. Move into the penthouse. Permanently. Let them see you belong at my side." She shook her head fiercely. "And if moving improves their version? If it screams see she trapped him?" Andrew's chest rose with frustration, then softened as he stepped forward, gently catching her chin. His thumb caressed away a tear. "I don't care what they scream. Let them choke themselves hoarse. You can't keep suffering in silence to pacify their cruelty." Her lips trembled. "And what if it costs you everything?" Andrew's eyes burned like embers. "What good is everything if I lose the one truth that matters?" His words were fire, but fire did not erase the cold stones pressing down. Moving in with him wasn't just about a new address. It meant surrendering her privacy forever, standing fully inside a glass box where the world could tap at her walls. That night, she lay sleepless in her apartment, staring at water stains on the ceiling. Outside, reporters waited even past midnight, their cameras glinting under street lamps. She could not step outside for groceries without being stalked. She couldn't slip into hospital visits with her ailing mother without lenses clicking like locust wings. She was suffocating. By morning, the decision made itself. She packed what few boxes she owned and followed Andrew back into his world. He welcomed her into the penthouse with quiet triumph, helping lift boxes despite the absurdity of billionaire hands carrying toaster ovens and dog-eared books. Yet as he set each item down with reverence, Clare realized he understood. Her possessions were more than objects. They were anchors of a life too proud to vanish. Living together revealed another layer of his devotion. He cooked clumsily just to see her laugh, burned toast and scratched eggs on stainless pans worth more than her weekly wage. He sat with her mother at the hospital, ignoring puzzled stares of nurses who whispered about billionaires and shabby polyester chairs. He whispered declarations against her hair at night. "You are not my scandal, you are my salvation." But the storm still roared. At Weston Industries, Andrew faced whispered dissent from board members. Market analysts wrote critiques. Weston jeopardizing empire with reckless romantic entanglement. Old rivals circled, hoping to seize on gossip as weakness. One evening, Andrew returned home later than usual, shoulders carved with exhaustion. Clare met him with worried eyes, coaxing him to sit by the wide window overlooking the city. "They wanted me to step down," he admitted quietly. "Not outright. But the pressure's building. They think I've lost focus." Fear hollowed her chest. "Andrew, if I'm destroying your position." He silenced her instantly, his hand covering hers. "No. Don't you dare take their blame. They'd devour me whether or not you stood here. But with you, I remember who I am. Without you, I'd be the hollow mask they crave." The conviction in his voice steeled her trembling. Yet shadows lingered. How much longer before cracks spread too wide? The answer seemed whispered the night of his father's memorial dinner. Held at the family estate, the gathering oozed with tradition. Long oak tables, portraits of solemn ancestors watching from gilded frames. Clare walked at Andrew's side, shoulders square though every stare weighed like stone. His brother Michael smirked from his seat, wine swirling in his glass. His sister offered another polished greeting laced with poison. Conversation stayed civil until Michael leaned forward across the table. "We all appreciate your attempt to introduce Clare into the fold," he said. "But let's not pretend. If this continues, the board will push you out. And when they do, what then? Your empire slips through her fingers as fast as she arrived in them." Clare's throat seared with humiliation. She forced her jaw steady, but Andrew's hand tightened over hers under the table as though drawing strength. "What then?" he repeated flatly. "Then I leave with the only wealth that matters." The silence cracked like ice under his words. The entire room bristled, forks paused mid-air. Michael laughed coldly. "All this for a girl from a bakery? You'll burn a dynasty for breadcrumbs." Clare couldn't breathe. Every gaze cut her to shreds. But Andrew rose suddenly, his chair scraping across marble. His voice carried steel sharp enough to slice portraits down from their walls. "This dynasty was built to control us, not protect us. But Clare is no threat to legacy. She is the reason I'll have won beyond numbers and ledgers. She saved me when rain stripped everything from me. And she will not be erased. My board, my empire. Let them see. If I must choose between power and love, the decision was made long ago." The confrontation ended in fractured silence. His declaration shocked them all, left Michael pale with fury. Clare sat trembling, her every instinct screaming at her to shrink. Yet pride tangled with terror in her chest. Pride because Andrew's fight was woven now with her existence. As they drove home, the night rain began again, streaking windows. She clutched his hand tightly. She didn't whisper doubts this time. She didn't ask if they'd survive. She only gazed out at rain-glossed streets and let herself believe, for however long borrowed courage could last, that some storms weren't meant to scatter but to forge fire from water. Because for the first time, as rain drummed like war against the city, she realized. She was no longer only surviving Andrew's world. She was inside the war with him. Together. The storm outside could not rival the storm brewing within Andrew's empire. For weeks, whispers twisted through Weston Industries boardrooms like smoke, suffocating trust. Andrew, steadfast in open defiance, carried Clare beside him, but enemies carried daggers, and one waited closest to home. It began with a leak. A glossy magazine published confidential figures about an impending merger, lined with anonymous source commentary that crippled negotiations overnight. Stocks dipped. Investors panicked. Headlines screamed that Andrew Weston's judgment had faltered because he was distracted by love. Clare read those words at the penthouse table, coffee growing bitter and cold, heart splintering. Distracted by love. It sounded almost romantic, yet written as poison. By evening, Andrew had stormed back from work, jaw locked stiff, papers crumpled in his fist. It was Michael, he seethed, teeth grinding the name. Who else would weaponize numbers like this and hand them to the press? Clare's stomach tightened. Your own brother? But why? Because my love for you is leverage, Andrew admitted darkly. Because as long as I refuse to bow to family expectation, he'll twist daggers until I do. Clare whispered, then I've become your weakness. Andrew's gaze snapped to hers, fierce, unyielding. No. You've become their excuse. Don't confuse the two. My brother's greed, his obsession with legacy, that's the true weakness. Not you. But she couldn't silence guilt. Night fell heavy with shadows pressing glass. After Andrew slipped into meetings again, Claire sat alone at the wide window, watching thunderstorms crawl across the skyline. She whispered to herself, unheard, what if love really isn't strong enough? The next morning flicked sparks into flame. Photos hit tabloids, grainy, low-angle, clearly stolen, of Claire hugging her friend Daniel in front of the hospital. The captions were malicious, billionaire heiress? Or already cheating? They had caught her on her knees crying after her mother's latest treatment, Daniel steadying her shoulders like a brother. But in print, his hand on her back became intimate. His presence became scandal. By noon, #Weston betrayed was trending online. Andrew arrived home livid. He threw the tabloids onto the marble counter. The headlines screamed back at them, venom dressed in bold fonts. His breath came ragged, not only with anger but old ghosts. The same family paranoia that once drove him to hide Claire in shadows. Tell me it's garbage, he begged, voice cracking as his fist pressed against his jaw. Claire's chest ached. The hurt that he even needed to ask twisted sharper than gossip itself. Andrew, she whispered softly, Daniel has known me since I was a child. He's family by bond, not by blood. Nothing more. You know me. His hands trembled against the countertop. The silence stretched sharp between them, filled with doubt not born of her actions but born of a life where betrayal always bled close to home. She stepped toward him, forcing him to meet her gaze. If this storm is the price of loving you, I'll pay, but don't you dare let them make you see me through their lies. For a moment, fire raged in his eyes. Then, like thunder collapsing, shame broke him. He pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. Forgive me, he choked. Forgive even that doubt. They'll bleed me dry before they break what we have. Her forgiveness was wordless. Just the warmth of her forehead pressed into his chest, her silent promise that she would fight too. By late week, evidence surfaced. Their attorney traced the photos directly to a paparazzi payment funneled by one of Michael's associates. Proof of sabotage. Andrew unleashed fury publicly this time, a press statement laced with scalding truth. The lies printed against Clare Morgan are calculated falsehoods by those desperate to erode my integrity. They will not succeed. It was bold. It was explosive. And it was dangerous. Michael retaliated, calling a board vote to strip Andrew of CEO authority, for the good of the company. Claire watched the storm unfurl from the penthouse, every news anchor debating love versus legacy, choice versus responsibility. You could end this, she whispered one night, eyes dark under lamplight. One press statement saying it's over. That you made a mistake. They'll forgive you. They'll hand you back the empire without question. Andrew stared at her like she'd stabbed him. Is that what you think? That I could trade you away like a commodity in a deal? Tears welled, threatening to swallow her voice. I think, you worked your entire life for what you have. And now you're burning it all in flames for me. And I don't know if love justifies fire. He caught her hands, pressing them hard over his heart. Love doesn't justify the fire, Claire, it survives it. If I lose everything but you, I still have enough. Her heart broke in that certainty. Because the truth was heavier, she didn't want him to lose everything. Loving him enough meant fearing what love could cost. The board vote erupted days later. Expensively dressed directors argued under portraits of founders, reporters thrumming outside double-glass doors. Michael painted Andrew as reckless, compromised, and snared by manipulation. Andrew defended with fire, that Claire grounded him, that transparency was strength, not scandal. At home, Claire followed streams online, every motion, every rumor draped in ice across her skin. Her phone trembled with messages, half vicious threats, half strangers defending her humanity. When Andrew stormed back through the door by midnight, exhaustion pouring off him, she rose immediately. What happened? He collapsed into the sofa, running a hand down his face. They voted to strip temporary authority. Transition committees. Trial oversight with stakes attached. It's a war brewing, Claire, ugly and long. Claire's chest hollowed. The empire slipping, his voice ragged with loss, all because he'd refused to erase her. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. But then he leaned forward, eyes fierce with sparks. It's not defeat. It's their gambit. And they've underestimated one thing. Her trembling voice asked, "What?" "My love isn't weakening me, it's fueling me. They think Clare Morgan is a liability. But you, Clare, are the reason I'll win. Because we will fight together." Something flared inside her, a mix of terror, pride, and awe. The storm wasn't over, it was only beginning. But his faith in her, unyielding even under fire, breathed courage into the cracks of her fear. She took his hand, squeezed hard. "Then arm me," she whispered. "If we're in war, I won't be shielded in silence. Teach me your world so I can fight in it." And in Andrew's slow, astonished smile, she glimpsed what no scandal could erase. A future in which love didn't only weather storms, it commanded them. The war Andrew promised had walls made of numbers and daggers made of whispers. To survive, Clare realized she could no longer remain at the edges. She had to step fully into the storm, not as his shielded secret but as his ally. Andrew began teaching her. Late nights sprawled across glass tables, laptop screens glowing like battle plans. Balance sheets, merger deals, voting structures. Phrases she had never dared to touch from inside a bakery apron. At first her head spun, nerves twitching. But Andrew was patient, and his eyes gleamed with quiet pride each time she understood faster than even she expected. "You're sharper than half the board," he teased after a week. Her lips curved but her heart steadied. "One day I'll prove you right." He hadn't meant it literally, but fate did. The board called for presentations, public showcases of leadership to reassure shareholders that the empire would not falter. Michael prepared meticulously, storming conferences with polished speeches dripping in contempt for Andrew's conviction. Clare watched quietly from the sidelines, absorbing. But when Andrew caught sight of her taps scribbling furious notes one evening, determination flaring in her eyes, he set his pen down. "You're going to do something, aren't you?" he said. She glanced up shyly. "I've been learning. And if I know their weapons, maybe I can turn them." "Clare?" His tone balanced between concern and awe. "Teach me more," she insisted. "If this is our war, let me fight it." And so she did. At investor gatherings, she stood beside him rather than in shadows, calm in modest dresses but with eyes unflinching. Reporters tried baiting her with questions. "Are you only after wealth? What qualifies you to stand in rooms of power?" She answered not defensively but disarmingly. "I don't pretend to own his empire," she said once, voice steady into the cameras. "But I do own his heart. And anyone who thinks love is weakness has already underestimated what it can conquer." The clip went viral. Not because executives approved but because ordinary people devoured it, viewers saturated with hunger for sincerity among tailored scandals. Suddenly, comment sections flipped. The gold digger headlines fought against new voices. "She's standing her ground. She fights for him." But the turning point didn't come until betrayal revealed itself not only in whispers but in contracts. Clare was the one who found it. One nocturnal study session, she noticed small discrepancies buried in budget projections hidden within Michael's department. Funds siphoned quietly toward shell companies. At first she thought she'd misunderstood, but Andrew's sharp intake of breath as he leaned beside her confirmed it. "This isn't sloppy math," she murmured. "This is theft." Andrew's jaw tightened with grim pride. "And you found it." The next morning, he walked into the boardroom armed not with polished speeches but with Clare's quiet discovery. He laid the documents on the table, exposing millions bleeding into shadows orchestrated by the very brother demanding his removal. Gasps ricocheted across the room. Michael sputtered, accusing Andrew of fabrication, but Clare's steady documentation, the annotated trails she had combed for nights, hammered truth immovable. "This woman you call liability," Andrew said icily, eyes blazing across the table, "just exposed the rot you ignored for years. While you doubted her, she defended the empire more fiercely than you ever did." Reporters erupted hours later, headlines flipping fast. Michael Weston under fire for financial misconduct. Clare's name now ran alongside not as scandal but as vindication. The mystery woman who saved Weston Industries. For the first time since the rainstorm that started it all, Clare felt air filling her lungs with pride rather than dread. She hadn't just survived Andrew's world, she had reshaped it. But victories invite retaliation. Michael, disgraced, didn't leave quietly. You fed more tabloids. He whispered about Clare manipulating Andrew to bolster her own rise, staging even the fraud reveal as manufactured. Some believed. Many didn't. But the family fractured further. Sisters torn in sides, cousins whispering. It all came to a head at a shareholder summit where Andrew was to speak of renewal and trust. Clare insisted on accompanying him despite threats of protest just outside hotel ballrooms. When they stepped onto that carpet, flashbulbs assaulted them like lightning. Hecklers jeered, some mocking her name, others screaming loyalty for Michael. Andrew ignored them, but Clare's hand tightened in his until her palm ached. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers, but hostility pulsed thick among suits and rows. Every question was barbed, every tone doubting. And then, without planning it, Clare rose to speak. "Let me answer," she whispered to Andrew, who looked startled but nodded with trust. Her voice began quiet, brittle at first, but sharpened quickly, iron hidden under silk. "You've painted me villain, distraction, liability," she told the audience. "But all I've done is love a man who deserves more than the prison you built for him. You judge me by broken shoes I once wore, as if bread under fingernails stains dignity more than greed does. You call me weakness, but I've seen Andrew at his strongest when he is most human. If legacy cost humanity, then maybe you ought to ask yourselves what worth it truly has." The room vibrated with murmurs, some startled, others impressed at her unflinching gaze. Andrew reached for her hand under the table. His eyes burned with something deeper than gratitude. It was pride stitched with devotion. The following day, papers printed her speech in full. For once, tabloids called her eloquent, improbably commanding, and viral clips painted her not as scandal but warrior. Ordinary people across social networks hailed her. She is us pushed into their ballroom. She carved her place. Andrew kissed her that night against the enormous window, the city glittering like spilled stars. "You're no longer only my protector in storms," he murmured. "You are the storm itself." And for the first time she felt it true. The war had not yet ended. But Clare Morgan was no longer a poor girl drowned by shame. She was a woman whose strength, once written off as weakness, had begun to bend billion-dollar empires. Autumn in the city unfurled with amber leaves and cool winds, but for the first time since the storm had bound their lives together, Clare did not feel the chill. The world had shifted. What began as ridicule had melted into awe. Headlines that once mocked her now carried captions of reverence. The woman who stood with Andrew Weston through fire. Clare Morgan, from bakery to boardroom's brightest surprise. The tide had turned. Ordinary people, the ones who bought bread, who took buses home at night, who had once whispered about conspiracies, now saw themselves reflected in Clare's patience, her strength, her fight. Where she had once been branded liability, she had become legend. But recognition did not erase exhaustion. Clare still found solitude in the quiet corners of the penthouse, away from the flashbulbs and speeches. Some days she longed for nothing more than her tiny bakery counter, the smell of yeast and cinnamon grounding her. Andrew found her there once, curled up near the window despite the skyline glittering endless promises around them. "You're somewhere far away," he whispered, crouching beside her. She smiled faintly. "Somewhere with fewer cameras." His gaze softened. "Would you trade all this just to go back?" She thought about it. The flour under nails, the cramped apartment with ceiling stains, the old laptop glowing faintly in the dark. Hardship, yes, but quiet anonymity sanctuary. Then she thought of him, his blue eyes, his relentless loyalty, his arms steady at her back no matter how vicious the world. "Not if it meant losing you," she said finally. He kissed her hair, lips lingering. "Then stop fearing you'll lose me. I'm not rain passing by. I'm your storm forever." The words warmed her until sleep claimed her softly. 3 days later, Andrew disappeared. Not vanished cruelly, business travel, emergency meetings, excuses wrapped in gentle smiles. Clare grew restless in his absence. She braced for another rumor, another sabotage, another battle waiting to choke the joy they had barely carved open. By the end of the week, she woke in the penthouse alone, city lights yawning in different outside glass walls. But then came the letter. On the small marble counter sat an envelope, her name scripted in his familiar hand. Her heart raced as she tore it open. "Meet me where it all began. Tonight. No excuses. No hiding. Where it began. The words struck lightning across her memory. The cafe, the storm, the rain dripping from his lashes when he had stumbled from a broken car into her world. Night rain returned as if orchestrated to bless the moment. Claire dug through closets for an umbrella but found none. She laughed shakily to herself. Fitting, perhaps, that she would make the walk bareheaded under the drops as she did that first day. The cafe shimmered in neon just as it always had, humble, a little battered at the edges. But as she stepped inside, time unraveled. For there he was, same booth, same corner, his suit darker than night but his eyes bright as storms. She froze. He rose. For a few seconds, the world hushed. Rain softened into music, chairs and chatter faded. It was only them reborn. Claire, he said, her name hoarse from the weight of years. She breathed, Andrew. He gestured toward the booth. Sit. Just once more. Before everything changes. Heart unsteady, she obeyed. He placed something on the table between them, a small box, velvet, trembling in its stillness. Her throat closed. I was a coward once, Andrew said, voice rough. Years ago, when you saved me from a storm, I should have asked for your name and never let go. Instead, I let life pull me away, told myself excuses about timing and legacy. And when I found you again, I promised never to hide. But hiding has been my sin longer than you've known me. Her eyes blurred. Andrew? That ends tonight. Because storms can take everything, cities, names, empires, but they gave me you. You who saw Andrew when the world only saw Weston. Clare Morgan, you are the reason I belong to something more than numbers. He opened the box. The ring shimmered emerald, green as ocean depths, simple yet eternal, the same stone she had once mentioned idly as her favorite while laughing over cheap coffee years earlier. He had remembered. He had carried the detail like gospel. Gasps caught in her lungs. I return not as the man drowning in rain, nor as the billionaire they all fear, but as your Andrew. And this time, I kneel not under shadow but under truth. He did kneel, right there in a worn cafe, patrons startled, waitresses blinking, rain tapping approval on the glass. Cameras did not matter, chandeliers did not matter, no dynasty or scandal had place here. Only two souls, storm tethered since fate's first afternoon. Will you marry me, Claire? Not my world, not my wealth, just me. Forever. Her tears warmed her lips. The cafe blurred. Her heart steadied into certainty as though it had been waiting since the first day's storm. Yes, she whispered. Then stronger, firmer, flooding the room with truth. Yes. Applause erupted, not just from him but from the strangers around, swept in by the tide of their love. Andrew slid the emerald ring onto her trembling finger. It fit as if carved by destiny itself. He rose and kissed her, raw and desperate and impossibly tender. All storms forgiven, all wars rendered silent. For one infinite second she was the poor girl no longer defined by scarcity, and he was the billionaire no longer warped by legacy. They were simply two humans who had saved one another, first from rain, then from themselves. Outside, the storm broke open, not violent but cleansing. Lightning painted the horizon, and the world seemed to wink approval. Claire pressed her newly ringed hand to Andrew's cheek, laughter weaving with sobs. From the rain, he whispered against her lips. All the way to this. And just like that, the poor girl who once saved a stranger had been returned to by a billionaire, with a ring that promised more than empire. It promised eternity. The weeks that followed their engagement unfolded less like war and more like dawn. The world did not stop talking. Journalists debated, relatives gossiped, critics lingered, but for the first time none of it mattered. Every argument, every tabloid blade, seemed blunted by the clarity of her emerald ring glinting against her hand and the permanence in Andrew's unwavering gaze. They returned to the penthouse, but it no longer felt like a fortress of defense. It felt like home. Claire unpacked her modest boxes fully at last, her books neatly filling shelves beside his collected art, her old kettle sitting proudly on his sleek counter. He teased that her kettle was the only thing in the place that truly whistled. She teased that his billion-dollar apartment had nothing on the smell of bread dough rising on Maple Street. They still walked past that bakery some mornings. Patrons would stare, wide-eyed, some whispering about the fairy tale walking hand in hand down cracked sidewalks. Claire would smile quietly, never forgetting that before emerald rings and glass towers, her world had been dough beneath her fingernails and a ceiling stained with watermarks. Now, when people said she had risen, she only thought of how she had simply learned to fight standing tall without bowing to anyone's expectations, except the pull of love. Andrew embraced that. He told interviewers without hesitation, "Claire saved me long before I ever saved her. She gave me truth when no one else dared to." Watching his pride gleam across networks made her smile even on difficult days. Not all opposition vanished. His brother Michael still hissed from the shadows, lawsuits threatening but never piercing, anger eating at him more than any victory could. Society still hosted its grand halls and murmured, improper, under jeweled smiles. But when Claire entered those same rooms at Andrew's side, holding her head high, the murmurs sounded hollow, fading echoes of an old world slowly crumbling. The true proof that storms had forged something indestructible came long after their engagement. It was not in the grandeur of wedding invitations. They chose a small ceremony, a quiet beach with the horizon wide and unpolished. Not in the emerald on her finger, polished though it was. It was in how love molded itself into daily life. In the mornings, Andrew burned pancakes while insisting he was improving. In the afternoons, Claire studied new business initiatives, becoming not just his support but his partner in shaping legacies. At night, they curled against one another, city lights sprawling below them, and laughed at their own imperfections. "I don't miss silence anymore," she admitted once, folded into his embrace. "Even amid the storm, I'd rather fight together than live hidden and safe alone." Andrew kissed her forehead softly. "That's because together we've learned storms were never enemies, they were the proof." They celebrated their marriage with only closest friends. No fanfare, no velvet ropes. The rain whispered on the horizon that morning but never broke into fury. Still, droplets kissed her hair as they exchanged vows, as though the heavens themselves wanted to remind them of the beginning. Andrew's voice cracked as he repeated, "Forever," slipping the ring back onto her finger officially, sealing what fate had woven in water all those years ago. Claire whispered back, tears bright as sea glass, "Forever began in the rain." And that was the truth she carried into every day thereafter. Some looked and saw only the poor girl who married a billionaire. But Claire knew deeper. She had never been rescued for her lack. She had rescued him the moment she saw a drenched stranger not as power or wealth but as human. And he had returned, hardened but humbled, to prove that storms had only tempered what was already eternal between them. Years later their story still rippled. Interviews called theirs the ultimate love against adversity, articles quoted Andrew's speech at the gala, books even compiled modern fairy tales, and named them Chapter 1. Yet Claire never forgot the simpler narrative. When their daughter, eyes bright storms of blue and brown, asked wide-eyed one rainy night, "Mama, how did you and Daddy fall in love?" Claire smiled and said only, "I lent a stranger shelter in a storm. And he never stopped coming home to me." The child giggled, unconcerned with empires or newspapers. And that was how Claire liked it. Because legacies may crumble, fortunes may vanish, storms will always return. But some things endure not because they are shielded but because they are weathered together. One poor girl, one drenched stranger, one improbable love. And now, every time rain pelted sidewalks and flooded drains, Claire pressed her hand against the emerald at her finger and remembered not the fear of lightning but the assurance of warmth offered across a battered café booth. He had kept his promise. He had returned. And though the world had tried to tear them apart, their love was carved now across empires and eternity alike. Not fragile, not scandal, just truth. Storms had brought them together. A ring had sealed them. And forever had made them unbreakable.